All right, thank you so much for joining us. We opened this session originally with students and high school students in mind here in Israel. It's actually opened up now to people around the world. So I know we have guests from many different countries. We'll be asking you a bit later where you are watching from, but thank you for joining Stand With Us. This is a special social media strategy workshop. We're coming to you live from Israel. As you know, it's been a very tough situation over the last 10 days or so with rockets coming in from Gaza and a very tense situation. Our thoughts and prayers are with all the families who have got injured people or who have lost people, God forbid. And one of the amazing things about this last week is the support that Israel's got from all over the world. And we see that in social media, because as you know, Stand With Us is very active on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and all kinds of social media, reaching really millions of people around the world. So one of the things that we know is that in the last week, people have been getting hateful messages, or you may be seeing anti-Semitism or anti-Israel content. And we wanted to run this workshop so you can understand how you can be active for Israel, and also how you should respond, when you should respond, and all the things you should be doing. So before I introduce our facilitator today, who's running the session, one of our amazing educators from the Stand With Us team, I just want to say thank you so much, because by being here, you've shown that you want to show up and you want to do something, and that's super important, and we really appreciate it. So thank you for being part of the Stand With Us family. I'm sure you're going to find today useful, so make sure you make notes, remember what's said, because it's going to be useful for you in the future, and we'll also give your friends the opportunity to see this session a bit later on as well. When we give you the website address, it's going to be uploaded to our website where you can watch it. So without further ado, I want to introduce the person running the session today. She was born in San Francisco, California, and she's the first generation American to Israeli parents. And growing up as an immigrant gave her a unique perspective and a strong family connection to Israel. She attended Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, where she studied international affairs. And she made Aliyah in 2018 and joined the Stand With Us team here in Israel. Prior to that, she had been a key part of the Stand With Us team in our campus operation in the United States. And after 2018, she has been running birthright enhancement programs for Stand With Us. Since the pandemic, she's now the producer of Stand With Us TV, and she spends a great deal of her time consulting and working with students all around the world to help them with situations like this. So she knows what she's talking about. I'm pleased to introduce Stand With Us is Noah Raman. Noah, you can take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that kind introduction. Good evening to those in Israel. Good morning to those in the Western United States or the Western world. I'm going to share my screen with you all so we can start the presentation. But just like Michael mentioned, I want to thank you first for being here, for being proactive with the stuff that you've been seeing online that might not be so easy. I can say that on the ground in Israel, it's been a tough week for us. However, online, it's been even more inflammatory. And this presentation, this next hour, we're really going to dedicate to how can we be more proactive online. Throughout the next hour, we're going to be discussing when you see something inflammatory, how can you respond? How can you do something with that information? How can you have more productive conversations if you're sliding into people's DMs and you want to call people out? How can you do it in a way that will actually lead to more productive dialogue? And lastly, having those hard conversations where if you don't agree with someone, how can we still come to a common ground that we all believe in the fundamental rights of human rights? With that, I want to start with Israel's story. At Stand With Us, we like to start every lecture, every conversation that we have, dedicating to telling Israel's story, because from there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation that has been created when people don't know the story of who we are and the Jewish people. Jews are indigenous to the state of Israel. Jews are indigenous to this homeland that we currently live in. For over 3,500 years, there's been a Jewish presence in this land. This is where our religion was created, our ethnicity, our culture, our language was revamped, and we have roots in this land. It's not saying that another group is not welcome. It's just saying that Jews have the right to self-determine in our ancestral homeland. For those of you who are familiar with the Jewish story, you know that it's been with a lot of speed bumps. We've experienced not such a kind history of many empires coming in, the Babylonians, the Byzantines, the Romans coming in, kicking out a majority of the Jews of our homeland. But as Jews, we didn't lose sight of who we are and where we came from. At every Passover Seder, at every Pesach, we say next year in Jerusalem, because we genuinely believe that next year will be in Jerusalem. And in 1948, the Jewish people reestablished the state of Israel, and we became a liberation. Jews in the Jewish story is a story of resilience that we should be proud of. And through this Israel story, this is really where we can elevate who we are and where we came from online and with the information that we see. With the state of Israel, we get a lot of media attention. If you zoom out to a greater map of the greater Middle East, you see that Israel only makes up 1/6 of 1% of the greater Middle East. Gets a lot of attention from national headlines, from local newspapers all around the world. But it's important for us to really note that this teeny tiny country, people like to create an us versus them, a David and a Goliath in national headlines. But the true reality is that Israel being established as this Goliath is incorrect, that we live in a very tough neighborhood. And it's important for us to note when we're talking about really the reality. Now, before we really jump into how we can have more productive conversations online, if we want to either comment and go back and forth with someone, or if we want to talk to someone that we know or know someone that we kind of know, how do we do that? So the first two words that I really want to define for us is disinformation and misinformation. Disinformation is information that is created maliciously with the intent of putting out inaccurate information and creating an inflammatory response, for example, to Israel. Is this information disinformation? Are they genuinely putting out information that they know isn't true? That conversation is going to go very different if someone does misinformation. Whereas misinformation, maybe some of us saw this on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, where someone is reposting something with the genuine intent that they want to help because they feel hopeless with what they see on the ground here. So they're reposting it, but they don't really know the facts or the sources of where this is coming from. They just know that there's an injustice. The conversation you have with someone who's going into misinformation is going to be very different if someone genuinely knows that this information is wrong and malicious. Now, understanding language is very important. On the left, we have a screenshot of, so if you want to know, it's an Instagram account that likes to put out information about different uses of what we see online. This specific one is about how we can stand up for Palestinian rights, which as Israelis and as people who are dedicated to this conflict are also wanting to bring more just peace to the region. Unfortunately, with this post, it's creating inflammatory messaging, where if we know the story of Israel, we know that Jews have an indigenous presence to this land, and we can't in fact be colonizers because we've been here for over 3,000 years. Whereas if you know someone who lives here, you know that every Israeli has equal rights and equal opportunities if they want to serve in the military, if they want to go and become a doctor, if they want to work in McDonald's. That's up to their choice if they're an Israeli citizen. Therefore, it can't be this minority versus majority, that a minority is ruling over a majority. It's just factually incorrect. Where the third one, a state sanctions violence, there's two sides of the story. As we know, there's two narratives to what's happening, but it's important for us to note that in the Gaza Strip, Hamas, a terrorist organization, a classified terrorist organization by many countries around the world, especially in the United States under the State Department, they've called out and said that Hamas is a terrorist organization. Therefore, both sides perpetuating violence. Israel is at war with Hamas, the terrorist organization. They are not at war with Palestinians. It's important for us to talk about Hamas because in this world of media bias, people aren't talking about what's happening on the ground. Why is that? Well, within this world of media bias, we see the authors who are writing this are not acting as non-observers, journalists. They're wanting to help and perpetuate a story about the Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So when we're talking about language and you see people using specific terminology, keep in mind that there's more to the conversation and that the context that they're using might be incorrect. For more resources about that, I will post later in the chat the Stand With the Situation room. If you want to receive action alerts of how you can respond to people, we'll also be posting that in the chat later, as well as live alerts from Stand With Us Telegram of how and what is happening on the ground, if there's rockets happening, and so forth. I didn't mention this in the beginning, and I want to mention it now. If you are currently in Israel and you hear a red alert and there's a rocket flying in your region, please run to a bomb shelter. Don't worry, if a red alert doesn't go around in my region, I will also still be here and we will continue. This will be recorded, but please make sure that you stay safe. That's the most important. Next. The next part of this presentation, this lecture, this conversation is how can we prevent putting out fake news? So I'm going to give you some really tools and skills from the Stand With Us digital department of how we can best do this in order for us to check our sources and have more, again, productive use of our social media time. The first one is to consider the author. Consider who is writing this source. What is their intention with putting out information about the Israeli-Palestinian Arab-Israeli conflict? Are they credible? What have they done in the past? Where have they worked at? What are different news sources that they've worked at? Even more so, to take it a step further, if this person was posted on a social national article platform or local newspaper, read the article, look and fact check what other people are saying about this specific cause. It's okay to have a difference of opinion. It's part of the conversation. And also reach out to experts, people who have dedicated their life to the conflict and what's happening on the ground. Whether it's people at our Stand With Us research department, feel free to utilize me as a resource throughout this and moving forward on, as well as our Stand With Us situation room, which again, I'll be posting later on, or even reaching out to people on social media. If there's anything we've learned with COVID and coronavirus, everyone currently is online, and feel free to reach out, DM experts in the conflict and hear them out, ask them more questions. They want to have a conversation. They want to hear from you. The next part is checking your date. For some reason with this conflict, more times than not, we've seen photos from the past being recycled. It's still a tragedy of what has happened in these photos, but it's not okay to recycle old photos. It's only creating, again, an inflammatory messaging, and it's not true. It's not factually correct. So keep in mind with current events, what is the story? Where was this photo posted? And looking at the dates. The next part is checking your biasing. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has a lot of opinions. People who have personal connections, people have personal stories about what's happening. That's what makes this specific conflict and talking about it so passionate, is that people have ties to the land. Hear them out, be curious about what they're saying, just recognizing when this bias turns against an anti-Israel messaging or anti-something else. It's important for us to open the dialogue to everyone and to also know when does this dialogue being crossed into anti-Semitic conversations. So looking at where this person is coming from, if you're engaging with someone that you know via DM, what resources or news sources are they utilizing? Even with celebrities, if you see a celebrity posting, feel free to DM them as well. They may not respond because they have millions of views, but it doesn't hurt because you might be the only person with the pro-Israel voice to respond, which I encourage you to do. Or even with someone who's getting in a Facebook argument, or you yourself is getting in a Facebook argument. You're not necessarily having a conversation with that person, you're having a conversation with the world. And as the world, it's our job to like those posts in order to gain traction for this pro-Israel, this pro-peace messaging. The next one is reading beyond the headline. Makes you do more work, yes. For us humans, human nature is to be pretty lazy. We see a headline and we get frustrated right away. But I encourage you all to read through the headlines. You never know what you'll find. Maybe what the headline says is completely different from the article. For example, let's say a couple of years ago, there was a headline that was talking about operations in Gaza and right around Gaza, and it just happened to be that it was a routine looking through what was happening rather than Israel boots on the ground going in to Gaza. It was just surrounding and usual routine. So read beyond the headlines. Also read multiple sources. If you're going to be posting about something, make sure that you're looking from all different perspectives. You're looking through different opinions, you're engaging in dialogue. What is the whole story of what's happening on the ground? The next one is to consider the source. With every news article, social media post, everyone has an initial bias, as we mentioned earlier, but also to compare what is their mission, what is their maybe hidden agenda or their prerogative with what they're posting out. And then they're going to be really highlighting that in all of their posts moving forward. Supporting sources. So again, so you want to talk about the Palestinian rights earlier, being a pro-peace organization, we believe in the rights for both Israelis and Palestinians. At the end of their infographic, what we saw for that earlier slide was talking about what you could do, which was the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. The boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, their leaders have said very loud and proud in the public eye that they are anti a Jewish state, that they want to obliterate and eliminate the Jewish state, which within our pro-peace messaging and people who are activists online, 9 million people shouldn't be displaced for another people. How can we come together and utilize both people to have just peace? Now, with these supporting sources, obviously, as we mentioned, the biases are these random blogs what are their sources, making sure that you're really looking into what is backing up what they're saying. Lastly, is this a joke? I know this is like satirical and can be pretty frustrating to see online because people are using humor really to perpetuate inflammatory rhetoric online. The Onion is one of them. It's a satirical newspaper source. I can tell you about my time when I was at Lewis and Clark in Portland, Oregon, that someone posted a similar headline like we see on the screen, that Israel is doing X, Y, and Z. One of my friends commented on that post, and they responded saying, "Oh, this is just satire, but there is some truth to this." And then there was a back and forth there. So with seeing satire and with seeing jokes, really standing up, utilizing your voice, saying this isn't okay. This isn't only perpetuating violence for my community, as we've been seeing break out throughout the world. Specifically with Trevor Noah, there's right now a call for action to really call him out, and how he talked about the conflict is just inaccurate. So really calling it out and utilizing, again, your voice online. With that being said, we're now going to go into the bit of how can we have conversations when they get hard. So the first thing, always note that some people online really feel hopeless and feel like they want to make a difference, and them making a difference is by reposting something of an injustice in the world. So if you're going to respond to someone you see on social media, act with good faith, recognize that yes, I see where you're coming from. I agree with you that there is an injustice, but let me give you more sources to broaden your horizon. Have empathy. I think it's really important as humans, and with things going on around the world, it's important for us to really highlight that we are all looking to make a better world. And through that, with what we see online, it's not always translated in that way. But coming again from a people to people, an individual to individual perspective. Maybe some of these people, I can tell you from the people that I reached out to that you see on the screen, I know they've never been to Israel. I know that they maybe only know one Israeli, which is myself. And sometimes it's frustrating to see people posting online where they have no correlation to the conflict, but they see an infographic and they feel the need to post. So going with best intent, seeing where they're coming from, and starting the conversation, not from a place of being frustrated with what they posted, but maybe even coming back to it. I can tell you this last week, I've been coming back to certain friends who've posted inflammatory rhetoric. And even like the next day, I decided to send them a message and say, hey, listen, there's more to what you're posting. There's more to the conflict. I want to tell you about X, Y, and Z. So really coming from a place, checking your internal temperature of what is my anger level. As a yogi, I can tell you that it's super important to first be centered with yourself, because if you go into a conversation saying you're wrong, just like you don't want to receive that kind of message, another individual doesn't want to receive that message. So coming from a place, again, of empathy. And finding common values. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to agree with their narrative or you need to agree with their sources, but just coming from a place of building a relationship. Online, in person, we build relationships through showing that we're human. And the hope is with this built relationship, we want this person to come back to you as a source of knowledge, a source of wealth, in order for you, again, to have more productive dialogue with this conflict, what's happening on the ground. Don't necessarily in the beginning send them a message of why they're wrong and here are facts on why you're wrong. Again, no one wants that kind of jargon. But once you're at a place in the conversation to show them, okay, here are some more information about what they discussed, send them there. And then from there, also asking them where are their resources coming from. There's a list of organizations, over 186 organizations that are working on the ground in Israel to create more peace for children between Israelis and Palestinians, for peace in the medical sphere, really peace in every sphere in Israel. But these organizations aren't always being highlighted, and feel free to screenshot the specific slide to show more intent, either for yourself to look more into these local organizations dedicating their lives, rather than media sources that are really just perpetuating a umbrella of anti-Israel rhetoric, where we can make a difference in our own really social media ecosystem. Look at it this way, that maybe you might be the only person in your social media ecosystem that is standing up for Israel. And that's why it's so important for you to use your voice and to really highlight that, to highlight your own experience of what it's like to be on the ground. I can also share with you guys resources from Stand With Us, where if you go to the Stand With Us Situation Room, you can see, okay, this conflict didn't start a week ago, like the media perpetuated it. It started a month ago. What has led to this escalation of rocket attacks and the state that we're in currently? So feel free to utilize our resources. We're happy to help. Also, I'll send in a couple minutes the Telegram connection, or the link. But as you're utilizing social media, we're all on social media because we want to connect. We want to connect with our friends, with our family from all over the world, and use it to your advantage. Where if you want to really use material that's funny, informative, newsworthy, inspiring, make it match your personality. This is where you can make change. People want to see the human in you online, and do that with Israel. Show the human side of who these people are, because it's not always shown online. And lastly, for the Israelis in this Zoom chat, show your experience. I posted this on my social media about exactly a week ago. It was the first time that I had to run to a safe room in my apartment. I don't have a bomb shelter, so I hid in the bathroom for about an hour, hearing the rockets and the Iron Dome overhead. I can share with you, it was one of the scariest moments of my life. I've never been in a state of conflict or a state of war. And this specific post started a ricochet, or a sort of like a domino effect of many friends reaching out to me to learn more about what was happening on the ground. Dialogue that didn't always end in us having the same side or same agreement, but it's okay. I think if there's anything we can highlight is it's okay for us to disagree as we go into conversations. Again, we're not trying to change people's minds. We're just trying to spark an interest in learning and humanizing our Israeli side that makes up so many different ethnicities and cultures and religions, and who we are and what we stand for is peace. To close, you can make a difference. Maybe some of you will be surprised that the second largest Stand With Us page is Stand With Us Arabic, where we get messages on the regular of thank you so much for the work that you're doing. There's many influencers online that are posting, responding to different celebrities, and with views that are reaching millions. You will never know who you will influence. And again, we're coming from a place of telling Israel's story, and that's what we need to elevate. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to open it up to questions. I know that this is a webinar, so we can't see you, but I feel your presence and I thank you again for joining. I just hit in the chat the situation room and I clicked the Telegram. One note about Telegram, if you want to join, you have to download the app first and then you can click join chat. And with that, I'm going to take some questions. The first one is from South Africa. Regarding what journalists post, how can we be sure that they're genuinely posting misinformation with no knowledge of truth, or are rather posting it maliciously to blame the Jews and get more views, thus make more money? So that's a great question. The first thing about how national news, the national news headlines are really social ecosystem is that within discussing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it's very easy to post about Israel. Why? Because it's the only country in the world that has a provocative conflict where journalists can fly in, stay in Tel Aviv in a comfortable home, drive down either into West Bank, Judea, Samaria, however you define that region of the world, or the Gaza Strip, show that it's a conflict, show that it's inflammatory, and then eat a really nice restaurant, one of the best in the world in Tel Aviv, and fly out the next day. So it's it's not something that we should shy from, but it's known within journalism and the school of thought that Israel, that there's this understanding that we show Israel in a certain light. There's also been multiple news articles that have also shown that Hamas, the terrorist organization that was democratically elected to the Gaza Strip, has held journalists hostage, telling them that they can't post anything that is showing them in a bad light. There's also been multiple articles, which I can send you privately as well, about how Hamas just recently, with the current attacks to Israel, the IDF targets specific points that show that there's Hamas intelligence in the Gaza Strip, and AP a couple years back showed that they knew about it but didn't do anything because they were scared for their life. Unfortunately, there's this initial bias. Coming back to how we can understand if this is misinformation is by reading multiple news sources rather than posting it, showing the differences, again, from the local news articles, whether it's the Jerusalem Post, Times of Israel, Wall Street Journal does a good job of representing the true reality of what's happening on the ground. And again, journalists, it's not who they're reporting from, or it's not what's happening on the ground, because they're taking away from being the non-observer, but actually becoming an actor and perpetuating the current violence because they're not discussing the current conflict for what it is. Hope that answered your question. The next question, where have rockets landed? I encourage you to go on our Stand With Us Facebook, Instagram, join our Telegram group that shows exactly where they've landed. They've really landed all over. Many people have lost their homes. Some people, unfortunately, have lost their life as a result of this conflict. And even in the Gaza Strip, some people, Gazan Palestinian children, have also been a victim to the rocket attacks. All right, the next question. How can we force anti-Semitic comments and post them to be taken down? The best way for us to force anti-Semitic comments and take them down is for us to report these specific posts. Tell your friends, tell your whole community to post or to report this specific post. That way you can get them taken down. We actually have a Telegram group where it's about action alerts, and we have a whole community there that allows people to take down anti-Semitic comments and posts. That's the best way to do it. And it's been very successful thus far. Okay, so the next comment or question. Okay, I have a Jewish Israeli friend that thinks this should be Palestine. What am I supposed to respond? So first, engage in dialogue, show again the story of Israel, and people are entitled to their own differences of opinions. My biggest suggestion is once you have this conversation and hear where they're coming from, you can also ask them if they want this land to be something else, where do they expect that the Jews will live? At the moment, we unfortunately are at war with the terrorist organization because in their Hamas charter, they've stated that they want every Jew to be obliterated and eliminated from this world. So in order for us to really make sure that we can make peace, we need a viable person, actor, government to make peace with. And we need to make sure that Hamas needs to be put to an end. Okay, the next question. How do you know if posts are anti-Zionist and also anti-Semitic? They may appear anti-Zionist, but give off a lot of hints towards anti-Semitism. So let's first define these terms. So first, the term Zionism. Zionism is the belief that Jews have the right to self-determine in their ancestral homeland. Now, it's not saying that another group is not welcome. It's just saying that Jews have a right to self-determine where they are indigenously from. Now, if something comes off as anti-Zionist, then it probably is anti-Semitic, because being anti-Zionist is saying that you're anti having Jews self-determine in their ancestral state. So that within itself is anti-Semitic. And if a post comes off, again, you can either comment, you can either report it in order to engage in further dialogue. The next question. How do we react to people saying it's disproportionate conflict and people utilizing anti-Zionist Jews as an example? Unfortunately, this is a conflict that is trying to, again, show differences of opinion, and sometimes people are being tokenized, like the anti-Zionist views, therefore creating this reality that all Jews are anti-Zionist, which we know in fact is not true. We need to talk about our own personal experience of being Zionist and showing, wait a minute, we're pro-peace and we believe in the Jewish state and the self-determination, and we can talk about peace with our neighbors and people living here on the ground. With disproportionate force and within the conflict, how we react to it. It depends if it's a conversation. The first thing that we should utilize is that this is a state of war, that Israel is not fighting, that Hamas is utilizing asymmetric warfare. We need to define who they are, a terrorist organization, what their charter states, how they are using their own citizens, Gazans, as human shields, hiding behind them, and that it's not a fair battle. We really need to humanize. Okay, why is the current conflict? Why is the world, why is Israel and even in a state of war? Israel doesn't want to be going in. It hasn't gone boots on the ground into Gaza. Right now, it's been fought through Chel Avir, which is our Air Force base, in order to prevent as many innocent lives to be lost. So as soon as, again, Hamas is no longer in power, the humanitarian aid that is supposed to go to Gazan civilians is not going to them. It's being utilized to build terrorist tunnels, building underground. Just a couple of days ago, it was mentioned that over 9.3 miles of terrorist tunnel was built to go into Israel. And it's not fair. Right now we're in a current state that it's asymmetric warfare, and it's not fair to the innocent lives that are being influenced by this conflict. Okay. At what point does criticizing Israel become anti-Semitic? That's a really good question. So I want to emphasize at Stand With Us, we always like to discuss being critical of Israel is important to our fundamental rights of being human and living in a democracy. It's okay to not agree with Israeli policies, or you might be frustrated with the current governance in Israel. That is not anti-Semitic. The part that it becomes anti-Semitic is when we start dehumanizing the state of Israel. Israel is doing this, therefore Israel has no right to exist. That is blatant anti-Semitism. Nobody is talking about what is happening in the Kashmir conflict or in North Korea, or really in Central and South America, specifically Venezuela. But for some reason, it's with the Jewish state that Israel doesn't have a right to exist because of war crimes. Now, it's not to say that Israel is allowed to do war crimes or any of these things. It's just saying that Israel should be held to the same standard as every other country. It shouldn't be demonized. And the idea of demonizing the state of Israel is in hopes of isolating it into a box and hopefully eliminating it, which again is anti-Semitic. And then also not to hold Israel to a double standard, as I mentioned, with dehumanizing it. It's not okay. So if someone brings up delegitimization, taking away Israel's right to exist, holding Israel to a double standard higher than any other country in the world, or demonization, ostracizing, putting all these blood libels on the Jewish state that Israel is doing X, Y, and Z, that dates back even to medieval times, that becomes anti-Semitic. From Israel, how do I choose which posts, videos, tweets to engage with and which to not? Okay, so in order to engage in posts, if you see a specific post that is anti-Israel and you see a lot of pro-Israel people who are representing your belief of Israel having a right to exist, either like that comment in regards to I agree with you. That will help highlight that specific post that is really showing the true reality on the ground. If you see something that is really just like anti-Israel and you don't see a lot of people posting, you can post if you feel like getting into a dialogue, if you feel like really engaging in it, but you don't have to. Again, with all of these things online, it can be very much draining. And the amount of anti-Israel rhetoric is exhausting. If it becomes like a violent post, then definitely report it, share it with people to also report, and really go from there. You can also feel free to share it with Stand With Us Digital, and we can also do our best to respond, report, and react. Okay. I think we have time for one more. Hold on. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to choose which one. You guys wrote a lot of good questions. I want to make sure I answered, or I am answering one from someone I haven't heard from. Okay. How can I approach a clearly deluded celebrity who can also see one side of the conflict? Obviously won't respond to DMs and probably will just filter my comment. So you can either, okay, so you feel like you won't get a response from a DM, still sending a response. You can also you can do a call from action, responding, for example, to Trevor Noah, writing him an email, writing to the Daily of how you don't agree with what he is saying and how he's not just representing himself, he's also representing the whole community of the Daily. You would be surprised what your DMs and what your emails will do, and get a bunch of friends to also send a message to the same person. Therefore, it's just not one voice, but it's multiple voices that will also be heard out by this. And even if you feel like someone's not going to respond, your voice matters. It makes a difference. Again, coming back to the social media ecosystem, sometimes we're just bouncing back what someone else is saying online, and it looks like everything we're posting is the same, but you might be surprised what one person on your followers list might not be seeing your specific opinion. So either you can respond directly to the celebrity, or you can also post on your own personal account, and you can get a whole community to be on board with what you're saying. With that, I think I can take one more question, and that is going to be, how do you respond to people saying Israel is an apartheid state? So talking about the facts. What is apartheid? Let's define it. It's when a minority race rules over a majority race, specifically apartheid South Africa. From 1949 to 1993, there was an apartheid state in South Africa where a minority white government was ruling over a majority Black community, or excuse me, citizens. Now, in Israel, in order to say that the state of Israel is an apartheid is just factually incorrect. If you are an Israeli citizen, you know that you have fundamental rights to do and say and post and be whoever you are. Also within the state of Israel, there's no minority group ruling over a majority civilians. And even to take it a step further, during this apartheid South Africa, there was over 155 laws, really institutionalized racism, dictating every aspect of someone who was Black in South Africa's life. Whereas in the state of Israel, that doesn't exist. There's no law that's telling one minority or group they're not allowed to do as they please. I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you. I'm just reading. Unfortunately, I couldn't get back to everyone, but thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate all the people who tuned in, who took the time to learn more. Feel free to follow us. Feel free to also reach out to me personally. I'm here as a resource. I'm happy to help you also find your voice online. And I can't emphasize enough that you do make a difference, that you should speak out, be vocal, and don't be scared, because there's a whole community of Israelis and pro-Israel people who believe in Israel's right to exist that are right behind you. With that, I will hand it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Noah. I just want to thank Noah so much for the session. Don't forget, she told you where we have all of our updated information and fact sheets and videos and social media information that you can share is at standwithus.com/situationroom. And if you want to get in touch with us, if you see something you're not sure about anti-Semitism online, something you want to clarify, you can email us at the same address, situationroom@standwithus.com. Okay, so all the links are in the chat there. Join us on our Telegram groups, download the free Telegram app. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for all that you're doing to get Israel's message across. You know, it can seem tough, but Israel's always, Noah called it a David versus Goliath battle, right? Goliath is a lot of different people all around the world, even some influencers with huge reach. And Israel is the David, it always has been. It's, 193 countries in the world. Israel is the only Jewish one. So we have to defend it, and we are going to defend it. And luckily, we're lucky in that Israel's cause is just. So you're doing the right thing. Don't forget to be in touch with us if you need anything. Thank you for being part of the Stand With Us community. Thank you, Noah, for running this excellent session. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone. Have a good evening, morning.